7 days is all it takes. Imagine this. A man is thrown into a concrete box, so small he can stretch out his arms and still touch both walls. There's no sound, except the hum of the vent above his head. No windows, just a narrow slit that barely lets in a slice of sunlight. On the very first night, he hears pounding, thud, thud, thud. From the cell next door, a prisoner smashing his head against the wall just to feel something. By day 3, the man starts to whisper to himself. By day 5, he's screaming. By day 7, he's begging to get out. This is not fiction. This is ADX Florence, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, a place so brutal that even the toughest criminals admit you won't survive a week here. But how did America build such a prison? And why do people inside break so fast? The fortress in the mountains. ADX Florence sits in the middle of Colorado, surrounded by mountains and desert. From above, it looks almost peaceful, like a school or a hospital. But step closer, and you'll see layers of razor wire, guard towers, and 20-foot walls of steel and concrete. This prison was built for the worst of the worst. Terrorists, cartel leaders, gang bosses, serial killers, even people who kill guards in other prisons. Here, escape is not just unlikely, it's impossible. Every hallway has cameras. Every door is controlled remotely. Even the floors are pressure sensitive. If you somehow made it out of your cell, you'd still have to face a maze of locked steel doors, snipers, and desert terrain. But survival here isn't about escape. It's about the mind. Life in a box. Inside ADX, each prisoner spends 23 hours a day locked in their cell. The cells are built almost like traps. Concrete bed, concrete desk, a small steel toilet, and a shower inside the room. Meals slide through a slot in the door. There's no contact with other prisoners. No touching. No talking. The only human face they see is a guard's, through a thick window. For 1 hour a day, inmates are allowed outside. But outside isn't what you think. It's a cage, barely bigger than a dog kennel, surrounded by tall concrete walls with only a view of the sky. This is why ADX Florence is called a clean version of hell. But the real horror is what happens inside your own head when the mind starts to break. Doctors have warned for years. Humans are not built for this kind of isolation. After just a few days, prisoners start talking to themselves. After weeks, some see shadows that aren't there, hear voices whispering from the vents, or feel like bugs are crawling under their skin. One prisoner once carved the word "Y" into his own arm, desperate for meaning. Another smashed his head against the wall until he collapsed. Even hardened gang leaders, men who once ruled entire cities, have cried in their cells, broken by silence. And here's the shocking part. ADX Florence was designed this way. It wasn't built just to lock people up. It was built to erase them. The weak test. Former guards say they can tell within 7 days if a prisoner will survive here. By the end of the first week, some inmates start begging for transfer, others sink into silence, and a few don't make it at all. Even the prison staff admit, you can be the toughest man alive, but after a week in Florence, you'll see who you really are. And that's the terrifying truth. This prison doesn't just punish the body, it crushes the mind. The question, so could you survive it? 7 days with no voice to hear but your own, no window to the world, no touch, no freedom, just the hum of the vent and the weight of your thoughts. Most don't, and that's why ADX Florence is called a place where hope dies, the prison of ghosts. ADX Florence is often called a prison of ghosts. Why? Because most of the inmates here are people you'll never see again. They don't walk the yard like in other prisons. They don't eat in the chow hall. They don't talk to others on the phone. Here, your world shrinks to 7 steps from your bed to the toilet, and 10 steps from the door to the slit of sunlight on the far wall. That's it. That's your universe. Prisoners describe the silence as deafening. Imagine being locked in a place where the loudest thing you hear for days is your own heartbeat. Then suddenly, at 3 a.m., you hear a scream echoing down the concrete corridors. A scream that lasts for hours, until it fades into sobbing. And the worst part? You never know who it is. The walls don't let you see. The prison makes sure that every voice is faceless, every cry is nameless. It's as if the prison itself is haunting you. ADX was built with one goal: to erase identity. Here, you're not John or David or Muhammad. You're a number, a ghost with a name tag. And slowly, the prisoners start to believe it too, the monsters inside. But ADX Florence is not just filled with ghosts. It's also filled with monsters. At least, that's how the government describes them. Behind those steel doors sit some of the most infamous criminals in history. Terrorists linked to 9/11. Gang leaders who ran empires from behind bars. The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, once sat here in silence for decades. For many Americans, knowing these men are locked away in Florence feels like justice. They imagine these criminals suffering, paying the price for their crimes. But here's the question no one likes to ask. What happens when you take monsters and put them in cages designed to break the mind? The answer is chilling. Some become even more dangerous, radicalizing deeper in their isolation. Others lose their grip completely, turning violent against themselves. And a few stop being monsters altogether. They become empty shells, too broken to fight, too shattered to think. This is a paradox of ADX Florence. It doesn't just punish the guilty. It transforms them into something unrecognizable. The hunger for control. Every single part of life inside ADX is controlled. When you eat, it's because a tray slides through the slot in your door. When you shower, it's because a guard pushes a button to unlock the nozzle in your cell. Even when you exercise, it's inside a cage, watched from above, every move counted, every breath monitored. For prisoners who once commanded armies, who gave orders that shook entire cities, this total loss of control is a torment far worse than chains. One inmate once told his lawyer, "I don't live here. I only exist." And yet, that's exactly what ADX was designed for. Not just to strip away freedom, but to strip away control until a man no longer feels like a man, until he feels like nothing. But sometimes, even in the most controlled place in America, chaos finds a way in. The cracks in the concrete. They say no one has ever escaped ADX Florence. And officially, that's true. But cracks have appeared, both in the walls and in the minds of the people inside. In 2012, a lawsuit revealed shocking stories from inside. Men mutilating themselves, swallowing razor blades, setting fires in their cells. Guards sometimes found blood smeared across the walls like messages from another world. Even more disturbing, some inmates didn't want to escape. They wanted to end it all. One prisoner begged for the death penalty, saying it would be kinder than another year in ADX. And yet, the prison continued, stronger than ever. Because to the outside world, ADX Florence is not a place of cruelty. It's a place of safety. A guarantee that the worst criminals will never walk free again. But inside those walls, it's a different story. One where survival is counted not in years, but in days. The 7-day question. Here's where everything comes back full circle. Could you survive a week here? 7 days of silence. 7 days without touching another human being. 7 days where your mind is your only company and your worst enemy. Most people think they could. I'd read books. I'd meditate. I'd tough it out. But ask anyone who's been there, and they'll tell you the same. You don't know what silence does until it swallows you whole. Some prisoners say they lasted just 3 days before the walls started closing in. Others say the first week felt longer than their entire life before prison. So, I'll leave you with this. If the doors of ADX Florence closed behind you tonight, if you were left alone in that cell with nothing but the hum of the vent and your own thoughts, El Chapo in the box. When Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the most feared drug lord on earth, was sentenced to life in prison, the U.S. had a problem. Here was a man who had escaped maximum security prisons in Mexico twice. Once through a tunnel dug under his shower, another time by bribing guards. So when his trial ended, there was only one place they trusted to hold him, ADX Florence. But here's the twist. For a man who once commanded thousands, El Chapo now lives in a cell where he can't even command a light switch. His world is 4 gray walls, a steel bed, and silence. No visitors, no phone calls, not even the faintest chance of escape. Guards say he spends hours pacing like a caged animal, muttering to himself. The irony? The man who built tunnels under cities now can't walk more than 10 steps in a straight line. And that's the ADX effect, turning kings into pawns. The Unabomber's silence. Ted Kaczynski, known to the world as the Unabomber, mailed bombs for nearly 2 decades, targeting universities and airlines. When he was finally caught, he too was sent to ADX Florence. But unlike others, Ted didn't scream. He didn't smash his head or beg for release. He went quiet. For years, he sat in his cell, writing letters, reading books, refusing to speak to anyone unless necessary. Guards called him the ghost of the range. But the truth is darker. Isolation didn't break him in loud ways. It hollowed him out. By the time of his death in 2023, Kaczynski had spent decades with almost no human contact. His end was as lonely as the prison itself. And his story shows something important. Not everyone screams in ADX. Some just fade away. The terrorist wing. One of the most tightly controlled sections of ADX is the H Unit. This is where the U.S. keeps men accused of terrorism, including some link to the 9/11 attacks. Here, security is turned up to the absolute maximum. Inmates are locked down even tighter, with no access to regular mail, calls, or even the prison library. Every word they write is monitored. Every move they make is logged. Lawyers who visited say the silence in H Unit is like nothing else on earth. Prisoners walk in shackles, even inside their own pod. Guards communicate through thick glass. Some prisoners here have not touched another human being in decades. Not once. And whether you believe they deserve it or not, one question remains. What happens to a human mind when it's denied all human touch? The price guards pay. It's not just the prisoners who suffer here. Guards do too. Imagine walking a hallway where every cell hides a man who either hates you, fears you, or wants to destroy you. Some officers report nightmares, stress, and paranoia after years on the job. Others say they feel like prisoners themselves, locked into endless routines, trapped in silence, surrounded by concrete and tension. One former warden once admitted, ADX doesn't just break inmates. It breaks staff too. And that's the hidden cost. To keep America's most dangerous men locked away, the prison has to slowly eat away at the people who run it. The crumbling mind. Here's the chilling reality. Psychologists who've studied Supermax prisons like ADX say the damage is irreversible. Spend years in a box with no social life, and your brain rewires itself. People forget how to talk, how to read emotion, how to function in the real world. When a rare prisoner does get transferred out, they often can't handle normal prison life anymore. Imagine a man who hasn't touched another person in 15 years suddenly being pushed into a crowded chow hall. It's overwhelming. Some collapse. Some lash out. Some beg to be sent back to the silence. It proves the darkest truth of all. ADX Florence is not just a prison. It's a machine that changes what it means to be human. The lawsuit that opened the door. For years, ADX Florence was a fortress of secrecy. The public only heard whispers, a scream in the night, a lawsuit from a desperate prisoner, a rumor of madness echoing through the walls. But in 2012, a group of prisoners did something almost impossible. They sued the U.S. government. In their lawsuit, they revealed shocking details of life inside ADX. Prisoners said they were denied proper medical care. Some claimed they were left in cells covered in their own waste. Others told stories of swallowing razor blades, setting themselves on fire, or smearing blood across the walls just to get attention. The most disturbing revelation? Many of these men weren't terrorists or gang leaders. Some were mentally ill. People who should have been in hospitals were instead locked in concrete boxes, left to spiral deeper into madness. The lawsuit dragged ADX Florence into the spotlight, and for the first time, the public began to ask, is this prison protecting us or is it torturing them? The mind unraveled. Psychologists who studied the men inside ADX began sounding alarms. One doctor wrote, isolation like this causes a slow unraveling of the human mind. And the evidence was chilling. Prisoners heard phantom voices through the air vents. Some saw faces in the concrete walls. Others believed bugs were crawling under their skin and clawed at their own flesh to get them out. One inmate even plucked out both his eyes in a fit of madness. Another tried to cut his throat with broken glass. Guards who found them described scenes that looked more like horror movies in a prison. And yet, every time the doors slammed shut again, ADX Florence carried on. The court of public opinion. When these stories came out, America split in two. Some people said, "Good, these men are monsters. Let them rot." They argued that terrorists and killers didn't deserve mercy, that ADX was the price they had to pay for their crimes. But others said, "Wait, this isn't justice. This is psychological torture." They pointed out that not all prisoners in ADX were mass killers. Some had been placed there for smaller crimes, or because they attacked guards in other prisons. Human rights groups stepped in, comparing ADX to secret CIA black sites, saying the U.S. was breaking its own rules on cruel and unusual punishment. And that raised the hardest question of all. If a prison designed to keep society safe is destroying minds, whose hands are really dirty? The suicide problem. One of the darkest legacies of ADX Florence is the suicides. Despite the prison's high security, men still find ways to end their own lives. Tearing sheets into ropes, smashing light fixtures into shards, even starving themselves on hunger strikes until their bodies give out. Every time it happens, the prison insists it's an exception, but lawyers and psychologists argue the opposite, that ADX is designed in a way that almost guarantees self-destruction. One former warden admitted that suicides at ADX haunted him more than anything else. He said, "We built a place to stop violence, but we couldn't stop the violence inside their own heads." And that's the truth. No matter how many locks you put on a door, you can't lock out despair. The debate that never ends. So, is ADX Florence the safest prison in the world? Or is it America's darkest secret? On one side, it keeps the most dangerous men alive and contained, far from public. There are no escapes, no riots that spill into the streets, no risk of a kingpin running his empire from behind bars. On the other side, it's a place where men scream into the void, where minds collapse in silence, where a human being can vanish long before his body dies. And the debate rages on. Some call ADX justice. Others call it a clean version of hell. But either way, there's one fact no one can deny. Spend a week in ADX Florence, and you'll never be the same again. The mastermind in silence. In 1993, a massive truck bomb exploded beneath the World Trade Center, killing 6 people and injuring more than 1,000. The man behind it was Ramzi Youssef, a terrorist who wanted to topple one tower into the other. When he was caught, the U.S. made sure he would never see freedom again. His destination? ADX Florence. Here's the chilling part. For years, Youssef lived in near total silence. Lawyers said he spent his days talking to himself, pacing his tiny cell, his mind replaying the same plan over and over. The man who once tried to bring down skyscrapers was now trapped in a box so small he couldn't even see the horizon. His punishment wasn't execution. It was a slow erosion of his mind. And that's what ADX does. It doesn't just cage bodies. It cages dreams. Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. If you ever heard about the shoe bomber, you know the story of Richard Reed. He tried to blow up a plane in 2001 by hiding explosives in his shoes. Passengers stopped him mid-flight. Now, Reed is locked in ADX Florence, where his shoes are the least of his worries. Guards say he spends most of his time reading the Quran alone in his cell. No visitors, no phone calls, no chance to preach his ideology. Every word he writes is screened. Every letter he receives is censored. His voice, once a weapon, has been silenced. In a world where terrorists often spread influence from behind bars, ADX makes sure that men like Reed vanish from the conversation. He may still be alive, but his voice has been erased. Robert Hansen, the spy who vanished. Perhaps the strangest prisoner in ADX Florence isn't a terrorist or a gangster, but a spy. Robert Hansen, an FBI agent turned traitor, spent over 20 years selling secrets to the Russians. When his double life was exposed, he was sentenced to life without parole and sent straight to ADX. But here's the eerie part. Hansen's punishment wasn't just prison. It was silence. Once an FBI insider with access to America's deepest secrets, He now spends 23 hours a day in a cell where no one speaks to him. His betrayal shook the country. His sentence erased him from it. And that's the story of ADX again and again. Men who once shaped history, now reduced to whispers behind concrete walls. The cage of forgotten names. Walk down a corridor in ADX Florence, and behind every steel door is a story. A gang boss who once ordered murders with a snap of his fingers. A bomber who once made nations tremble. A spy who sold out his own country. Yet in here, they are not legends. They are ghosts. Forgotten names in forgotten cells. The prison doesn't just lock them away. It erases them from memory. No TV interviews. No public speeches. No legacy. And that is perhaps the most terrifying truth about ADX Florence. It doesn't kill you. It makes the world forget you ever lived. A prison built like a weapon. Most prisons are built to contain people. ADX Florence was built to crush them. Architects designed it with one idea in mind. No escape, no rebellion, no hope. The walls are made of poured concrete, reinforced with steel rods. The windows are just 4 inches wide, angled upward so you can only see the sky, never the horizon. Even the yards, where prisoners are supposed to exercise, are just empty concrete cages, cut off from a world. Every detail was intentional. The cells face inward, so you never see another prisoner. The doors are solid steel with tiny slots, so sound barely carries. The hallways are built like funnels, forcing inmates to move one at a time under the eyes of cameras and rifles. It's not just a prison. It's a machine designed to strip away the human spirit. Brick by brick, wall by wall. A day that never changes. Life inside ADX Florence runs like clockwork, but the kind of clock that never moves forward. Prisoners wake up in the same cell they slept in. Breakfast arrives through a slot, never with a smile, never with a word. Then comes recreation, if you can call it that. 1 hour in a cage outside alone, under square sky. For some, it's the only time they see sunlight all week. Back in the cell, they read, write, or pace 10 steps back and forth, over and over. Lunch arrives. Silence. Dinner arrives. Silence. Lights dim. Silence. And the next day, the exact same. No weekend. No holiday. No change. Prisoners say the worst punishment isn't the concrete or the bars. It's the endless loop. A day that repeats so perfectly. It makes time itself feel like another prison. The sound of nothing. Here's something you never think about. Sound. In the outside world, we live in a constant stream of noise, traffic, voices, laughter, arguments, even birdsong. But inside ADX Florence, silence becomes a weapon. The prison was built to absorb sound. The thick walls swallow voices. The doors muffle everything. Guards move silently, their footsteps echoing like ghosts. Some inmates say they can go weeks without hearing another human being speak. Others describe hallucinating, hearing phantom music, whispers, even conversations that aren't real. The silence doesn't just surround you. It seeps into your brain until you don't know what's real anymore. The architecture control. Even the furniture is part of the design. The bed, concrete slab. The desk, concrete block. The stool, bolted down. Nothing inside the cell can be moved, broken, or used as a weapon. Even a shower is built into the wall. Control from outside by guards. And there's no privacy. Cameras watch every hallway. Guards check through slots and windows. Even letters are opened, read, and sometimes blocked before they ever reach the prisoner. It creates a system where control is total. You eat when they decide. You shower when they decide. You exercise when they decide. And slowly, you stop deciding anything at all. That's how ADX works. Not with beatings or whips, but with architecture that steals your choices. The illusion of freedom. Every so often, a prisoner gets what feels like a reward. A step down. If they behave, they can move from total isolation to slightly less isolation. Maybe a phone call with family once a month. Maybe eating a meal in a small group instead of alone. But here's the twist. Even this freedom is controlled. Every call is recorded. Every meal is supervised. Every step is watched. It's like dangling hope just out of reach, giving you a taste then reminding you it's still a cage. And that's the genius and the cruelty of ADX Florence. It doesn't break you all at once. It breaks you slowly, piece by piece, until you can't even remember what freedom felt like. The week that never ends. So we return to the question, could you survive a week here? 7 days in a box where the air is stale, the silence screams louder than words, and the walls don't just hold you, they erase you. For some, a week is enough to lose themselves forever. For others, the week never ends, because every day after feels like day one repeating. That's the real horror of ADX Florence. It's not that you won't survive a week. It's that even if you do, part of you won't come back. When the mind finally breaks. Every prisoner in ADX Florence has a breaking point. For some, it comes fast, just a few days in, and they're screaming, pounding on the walls, begging guards to move them anywhere else. For others, it takes months. They hold on, telling themselves they're strong enough, tougher than the silence, harder than the concrete. But ADX has a way of waiting you out. One prisoner began pacing his cell so obsessively, guards said he wore a groove into the concrete floor. Another started writing letters to himself, hundreds of them, filling notebook after notebook, as if trying to keep his mind alive by sheer force of will. And then there are those who simply give up. They stop eating, stop moving, stop talking. They sit on the floor, eyes fixed on the slot in the door, waiting for trays they no longer want. The truth is brutal. In ADX Florence, your mind is both your last defense and your most dangerous enemy. The hunger strikes. Desperation takes many forms. And one of the most powerful forms inside ADX is hunger. Over the years, prisoners have staged hunger strikes, refusing to eat, demanding better conditions, medical care, or simply human contact. Guards slide trays through the slots, and the food sits untouched. Days pass, then weeks. Bodies weaken. Some prisoners collapse in their cells, unable to stand. And when it goes too far, the prison responds with force feeding, strapping men to chairs and running tubes down their noses to keep them alive against their will. To the outside world, this sounds like defiance. Inside, it's something darker. Hunger strikes are not just about protest. They're about the only control left. When everything else is taken, even refusing food feels like rebellion. But the question is, how long can rebellion survive when your body itself starts shutting down? The rare sparks of rebellion, even the most controlled prison in the world. Chaos sometimes leaks through the cracks. Guards have reported small fires set with smuggled matches, flooded cells, where prisoners clog toilets and let the water rise. Secret notes pass through vents, proving that even concrete walls can't stop human connection. And then there are the bigger moments. Rumors of planned riots, whispers of escape ideas that never get off the ground. One inmate once tried to saw through the bars of his cage with a smuggled piece of metal. He was caught before he got far, but the attempt showed something important. Even in Florence, the dream of freedom flickers. But here's the truth. Those sparks always die out. Cameras catch everything. Guards swarm instantly. The machine resets. At ADX, rebellion doesn't end in victory. It ends in silence. Is there anything worse? ADX Florence has been called the clean version of hell, the end of the line, the place where even hope dies. But here's the chilling thought. What if it's not the worst? What if ADX is only the beginning? Government around the world are studying Supermax designs. Technology is advancing. AI cameras, automated cell doors, even robotic guards. Imagine a prison with no human contact at all. No guards, no lawyers, just machines. A place where silence is an accident. It's the rule. If ADX is the present, could the future be even darker? That's the question no one wants to answer. But one thing is clear. ADX Florence has already proven that you don't need chains, whips, or violence to destroy a person. All you need is silence, concrete, and time. The prison that erases you. So here we are, ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. From drug lords to terrorists, spies to killers, they all end up in the same box. 4 walls, 1 slot in the door, a sliver sky above. And here's the haunting truth. You don't have to be guilty to understand its power. Imagine yourself there. No voice to hear but your own. No touch. No freedom. Just silence pressing in like a weight. Most people think survival is about strength, muscles, toughness. But in Florence, none of that matters. Here, the real battle isn't with guards or gangs. It's with your own mind. And that's why the title is true. You won't survive a week here. Not because your body gives up, but because the prison takes something far more important. It takes you.